Launching a satellite without a flight plan, yeah, probably not the best idea, right?
Definitely not.
And as someone in the U.S. Space Force, having a solid plan is mission critical.
It's everything.
And that's where SDP 50 comes in.
Space Doctrine Publication 50, your mission control manual for space power, basically.
Exactly. It lays out how the U.S. Space Force plans its operations and integrates, right,
Right, integrates with the bigger picture.
Mm.
That's what we're diving into today.
the space planning process, or SPP.
We're taking you through it step by step so you can actually use it, apply it to your missions.
Making sure those space capabilities mesh perfectly with overall military objectives.
Like, you wouldn't launch a satellite without coordinating with ground control, would you?
Precisely. Everyone on the same page, that's what this doctrine ensures. From recognizing you need space power to putting it into play.
Everyone on the same sheet of music, so to speak. But space, I mean, that adds a whole other level of complexity to planning, am I right? It's not like moving troops on the ground. You hit the nail on the head. The space domain, it's got its own rhythm, its own set of rules. That's why we have this space planning process, that structured framework.
Okay, so for someone in the USSF, what are the key things about this SPP they should really know?
The SPP is just one piece of a bigger puzzle. It fits into this larger thing, the Joint Planning Process, or JPP.
So it's not just the Space Force doing its own thing, it's a team effort.
100%. The SPP takes those big picture military goals from the JPP and figures out how space power fits in.
Okay, space planning process, part of the joint planning process, got it. But where do we even begin?
SDP 50 lays out 8 clear steps. First up, planning initiation. And this is where you, as a USSF member, you're critical. You might be the one who spots that a situation needs space power in the first place.
So seeing those opportunities where space assets could be a game changer.
Exactly. Imagine you're looking at intelligence reports and you see something weird, unusual activity in a certain orbital slot, something that could mess with our communication satellites. That's your cue right there to kick off the planning process.
Okay, makes sense. You've spotted a problem brewing, and now you got to figure out what to do about it. That's step 2 then, right? Mission analysis.
Exactly. Step 2 is all about digging into the why behind even thinking about using space power. In this scenario we're talking about, you'd be asking, what are we trying to achieve? What happens if our satellites get messed with? And, really important, what info do we need to make smart decisions? We're talking about those commanders' critical information requirements, those CCIRs. They tell us what intel to gather, paint a picture of what's going on.
So we've identified there's a need, we've analyzed the mission, and we've got our objectives, our intel requirements. Sounds like time to brainstorm some solutions. Step 3, right? Course of action development.
You got it. This is where you get creative. Come up with a bunch of options, courses of action, COAs, to address the situation.
So like one COA could be to move a satellite to keep coverage going, while another one might be using stuff on the ground, ground-based assets, to make up for the potential disruption.
Exactly. Think of each COA as a different route to the same destination. Each has its own pros and cons, fuel consumption, how much risk we're willing to take, even the political stuff, it all factors in.
This is where it gets really interesting, right? Because now you have to think, how will others in space react to what you decide to do?
That's it exactly. And that brings us to step 4, COA analysis and wargaming. We're taking those COAs, those potential courses of action, and we're basically running them through a simulation.
So it's like a giant space chess game.
Kind of like that, yeah. Instead of bishops and rooks, we're talking satellites and ground stations.
And you're pitting your COAs against, counter moves by other countries, or even companies in space.
Exactly. Remember our satellite disruption example. What if one of your COAs makes another country do something? Maybe they move their satellite closer, try to escalate things. Wargaming helps us see those possibilities before they happen.
Lots of what-ifs to consider.
Oh, yeah. And unlike battles on Earth, we don't have a ton of experience with actual conflict in space, right? So predicting what someone will do is tricky, especially with technology changing so fast. This is where your knowledge as a USSF member is super valuable, knowing the space domain inside and out.
Sounds like you got to think several steps ahead in an environment that's always in motion.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And that's why we don't just wargame once and call it a day. We look at the results, we adjust, we refine those courses of action. It's an ongoing process, which is a big part of why SDP 50 works so well.
So we've got our potential COAs, we put them to the test. What's next? Time to pick the best option.
Almost. Step 5 is COA comparison. This is where we break down each COA, the good and the bad. How likely is it to succeed? What could go wrong? How much will it cost? Even the political stuff matters. It's all about making informed choices, not just.
Shooting for the moon.
There you go. But seriously, this is where the commander needs the whole planning team's expertise. You got to be clear about your assessments, lay out the strengths and weaknesses of each COA.
So the commander has the full picture. And that takes us to step 6, COA approval.
Right. The commander takes it all in the analysis, the recommendations, and gives the green light. Even though we're talking space here, communication is still key.
No matter how far out you are, clear communication is vital.
100%. Once that COA is approved, it's on to step 7, plan or order development. This is where that chosen course of action gets fleshed out, becomes a detailed plan. Timelines, who does what, resources, you name it. The whole shebang.
Turning that approved strategy into a real mission script.
Exactly. This is where your eye for detail matters, being able to spot those potential roadblocks before they pop up.
Even a perfect plan can go wrong if the logistics aren't there.
You got it. And that takes us to the final step. Step 8, transition to execution.
Putting that plan into action, the satellite needs orbit, so to speak.
That's it. This step is about making sure we shift smoothly from planning to doing. Everyone knows what they're doing, they've got what they need, and they're ready to adapt if things change because, well...
Things rarely go exactly as planned, especially in space.
Exactly. You've got to be able to adjust on the fly.
Okay, so we've gone through all 8 steps of the SPP, from realizing you need space power to actually putting it into action. But before we finish up, got to talk about some of the unique things that come with space operations, right?
Yeah.
Stuff you wouldn't deal with in a normal military setting.
You're right. Space, it's a different ballgame.
Like, what's the deal with this time distance problem I keep hearing about? Sounds like something out of Star Trek.
Oh, it's a real thing, and it's all about how insanely big space is. Imagine trying to move a whole battalion a couple hundred miles on Earth. Now imagine trying to reposition a satellite. The distances are mind-boggling, and even small changes take a while.
So a little course correction could take days, weeks even.
Yep, and that changes how you plan. You can't just radio for backup or make a sudden U-turn like you can on the ground.
Patience isn't just a virtue in space, it's a necessity.
You got it. And on top of the distance, you've got those fuel limits. Every move you make, it uses up that precious fuel. It's like planning a road trip with only one gas station on the way. Every decision counts.
Gotta think long-term in space. Every action has a ripple effect. Speaking of ripple effects, what about this increasingly crowded situation in space? It's like everyone and their cousin wants a piece of the sky.
It's getting packed up there, and that brings a whole new set of challenges. Countries, companies, even research groups, all competing for space.
How do you even plan with all that congestion, all that potential for, well, things to get a little tense?
It's a fast-moving target for sure, but SDP 50 gives you the tools to handle it. The big thing is being adaptable, being flexible, being ready to adjust based on what's happening.
Thinking on your feet, anticipating problems, and being creative with solutions. Those are crucial for anyone in space operations, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And it's not just reacting, it's about preventing problems before they happen.
Okay, so we've covered time and distance, the crowded space environment. Anything else our USSF listeners should keep in mind for space power planning?
One more thing, space power isn't just about what goes on up in orbit. There's a whole network of stuff on the ground that's essential. We focus on the satellites, but they're useless without ground stations, communication links, launch facilities, all that support back on Earth.
Disrupt the support, and the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly. That's why SDP 50 emphasizes knowing those weak points, protecting them, and having backups just in case.
Redundancy, resilience, big themes in space operations.
Yeah.
And that all ties into communication and working together, right? A
Right.
space force with the other branches.
Absolutely. Space power is a team effort now more than ever. You need that seamless connection between space, air, land, sea, even cyber to achieve those big picture goals.
It's amazing how intertwined everything is. And SDP 50, it gives you the framework to navigate all of that. It's incredible how much goes into planning for space, isn't it?
It really is. A true team effort. Everyone has a role to make sure the mission succeeds.
Speaking of playing your part, let's turn to you, our listener. Out there in the U.S. Space Force, we've unpacked a lot, those 8 steps, the unique space challenges, all of it. What should you take away from this? What can you actually use when you're dealing with space power planning?
Key thing to remember, SDP 50, it's not a rule book. Think of it more like a framework, a set of guidelines for thinking critically about space operations.
Not a cookbook, then.
Mhm.
Not just follow the recipe.
Exactly. It's having the tools and knowing how to adapt them to whatever situation you're facing.
Makes sense, especially with space changing so fast these days.
Exactly. Adaptability is key. Thinking on your feet, adjusting those plans when new info comes in or when the unexpected happens, which it will, right?
Flexibility, adaptability. Got it. What else?
Can't stress this enough.
Hmm.
Communication. Clear, concise, every step of the way. From the moment you realize you need space power involved, all the way to mission execution.
Makes sense, especially when you're talking about something this complex, involving different parts of the military, maybe even international partners, too.
Exactly. Everyone has to be on the same page, understanding the goals, the limits, the risks. Open communication is key. Up the chain, down the chain, across different organizations, the works.
Be proactive, communicate clearly, and be ready to adapt. Great advice. Any last words of wisdom for our USSF listener as we wrap up this deep dive on SDP 50?
Embrace the challenge. Space power planning. It's not easy, it's always changing, but it's incredibly rewarding too. You're at the cutting edge of a new kind of military operation where space is more and more important. Your expertise, the way you think critically, it's crucial for keeping our nation and our allies safe in this new frontier.
Words to command by. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into SDP 50. Hope this gives you a solid foundation for tackling the challenges of space power planning.